In this episode of Ask Paul Kirtley, we are going to be talking about cooking sets for canoe trips. What's the purpose of a bivvy bag? How to get people interested in bushcraft, dealing with loneliness on solo trips, and how to get to the Northern Forest. Welcome to episode 66 of Ask Paul Kirtley with me, Paul Kirtley, where I aim to answer your questions on wilderness bushcraft, survival skills and outdoor life in general. And more snow back in the north of England, and we've got snow again. I think it's only going to be brief. Rain this afternoon, quite damp and drippy. Snow this morning, snow yesterday. It's warming up. But yeah, I've seemed to have recorded more episodes of Ask Paul Kirtley in the snow than ever before. And there's potential for more snowy episodes coming up if I manage to fit in some recording on a trip that I'm doing soon. So keep your eye out for that. But without further ado, let's answer the questions for this episode. I've got myself under a hawthorn tree here. It's providing a bit of cover from the wet. Got some rhododendron on a couple of sides here. It's quite sheltered. Got my the foam insert out of my backpack down on the ground for a warm insulative mat to sit on. Again, as usual, I've got a warm drink. I've got one of these Trek bars, which I quite enjoy. No connection. I would be happy for them to sponsor the show, of course, but that's not what this is about. I like these Berry Burst Trek bars. I like those for while I'm out on a walk. Bit of energy. And yeah, just settle in and I will do my best to answer these questions. So going down in the order that they are in my notebook here. This is from Jason, and his question is about how to get to the Northern Forest. Hi Paul, I see you've been on a few Northern Forest trips, but how do you actually get there? I know you could get a plane up north, but then do you just walk into the wilderness or what? Question mark. I would love to go on a trip up north. I'm just unsure how to do so. Thanks, Jason Miller. Well, let's just backtrack a second there, Jason, because a question I also get from time to time is, where is the Northern Forest? I talk about the Northern Forest, other people talk about the Northern Forest, or the Boreal Forest is an interchangeable term. And it is a circumpolar forest that runs from Scandinavia, Fennoscandia if you like, through northern Eurasia, all the way across Alaska, across the top of North America, a band of forest all the way across. So it's this donut, if you like, of largely coniferous forest, although there are other species there, such as birches, aspens, and various others. And also it varies from north to south over its range of latitudes. But a lot of pine, a lot of spruce, a lot of birch, juniper, lingonberries, cowberries, blaeberries or blueberries. That type of habitat is what we're talking about, and it is the largest forest on Earth. A lot of people think about the Amazon as being huge, and it is, but the boreal forest is bigger. It's like the lungs of the planet in terms of the amounts of carbon dioxide it takes on, the amount of oxygen it gives out, and it is a wonderful environment. It's also a harsh environment in many ways. It's harsh in winter, it gets very cold in many of the parts of the boreal forest, and also in the summer it can be very wet. underfoot, in particular marshy, and then you've got mosquitoes and blackfly and those sorts of things. So it can be challenging depending on whatever time of year you're there. It's easier to get around in a lot of ways in winter because all of those waterways and marshes become potential thoroughfares for you to use skis, snowshoes, snow machines, but clearly there are risks to moving around on frozen lakes and rivers, and you've got to take that into consideration. But it is a wonderful place. All of the hot tenting stuff that I've done, that you've seen on my blog, has been done in the Northern Forest, and it's a place that I've been going to on a regular basis since 2003. So 15 years at the time of recording this, since I first went up to the Northern Forest in northern Sweden, and I've been to the Boreal Forest many times since, both in winter and in summer, as well as in Western Eurasia and Fennoscandia, also in North America, canoe trips, for example, in the summer, and some forthcoming winter trips perhaps as well, so watch this space. So it's a great environment. Bushcraft goes hand in hand with that environment. Fire is your friend. The classic lean-to shelter is one of the shelters that is most at home in that environment. Quinsies, hot tenting, moving around on snowshoes, moving around on skis, moving around on snow machines, dependent upon what you're doing. And it is just a wild, wonderful expanse of forest. Clearly it's not indestructible, and we need to look after it as well. And I've written and talked about many aspects of that over the years, in terms of going to do the bushcraft skills that are relevant there, but also doing it with some consideration for the environment. So how to get there? Well, it depends where you're starting, but I think, Jason, I get the impression that you're in the UK, but forgive me if you're not. The nearest, easiest place to get to in terms of Northern Forest accessibility would be northern Sweden, parts of northern Norway, and also Finland. And it's pretty easy to fly to those places. Fly to Stockholm, for example, and then fly to the north of Sweden. You can fly to Helsinki, you can fly to Oslo and then get an internal flight. Many other routes as well, of course. There's lots of ways of skinning a cat to get to those places, to go up to Tromsø, to go up to Kiruna, or Gällivare would be a place to kick off, one of those two places, or to go up to Helsinki, and there are other places in Finland you could try flying to as well. But it's not that easy, it's not that far, it's not that expensive, and I think you get that. The question then is, what do you do next? How do you get there? Well, you only need to fly into somewhere like Kiruna in the north of Sweden, or fly into even Helsinki, and you can see that it's surrounded by trees, and getting to the forest is not that difficult. There are providers. If you wanted to do a dog sledding trip, that's quite easy to book. If you wanted to do a multi-activity trip where you get a feel for what you can do there, you could do a bit of skiing or snowshoeing, you could do a bit of snow machining, some ice fishing, build a quinzee or an igloo, that type of thing. You can book on those sorts of trips relatively easily, and you just need to do an internet search for that, and that might be a way of getting into it. If you want to do something on your own, it's a little bit harder, but it's not that difficult in terms of getting transport to where you might want to start, whether you're getting public transport, getting a bus, whether you're getting a taxi. Those things are doable. Most airports in the world have got a taxi rank outside of them, even the small ones, and you can get a taxi to a local motel as a start-off point if you get there late in the day, and then you can get a taxi from there or a bus from there the next day to get to where you want to go. The question is where you want to go, and that's a harder one, because if you're just going to go into the forest on your own, that's got some perils to it. Clearly there's issues. If you're talking about winter, There are issues with cold injury risks. There are issues with, have you got the right equipment with you? It's hard to take everything that you need potentially on a regular commercial flight, you know, snowshoes or skis, winter camping kit. Clearly taking a canvas tent and a stove is not really possible without paying a lot extra. So you might end up cold tenting. You might end up, I know some people who've gone and taken a toboggan or a pulk and they've hammocked or cold tented, and that's quite a hard introduction to that environment, because it can be, you know, minus 20, minus 30 Celsius quite easily overnight, at least, even in, you know, late February, early March, depending on the times of year or the nature of that season. Some winters tend to be colder than others, and particularly in northern Sweden recently there's been a lot more variability, it seems, and as there has been in North America in some places. You know, we've had a lot of effects of that some people are attributing to global warming, El Nino effects, and all those sorts of things combined to cause some interesting varied weather conditions. So if you're there in the winter, you've got to be conscious of not getting too wet if it's warmer, not getting too cold if it's colder. You've got issues of crossing ice, you've got issues of overflow, water sitting between ice and snow on top of lakes and rivers. There are a number of issues that you need to be aware of. There's plenty of information on my blog about clothing and equipment, and I can link those below this on my blog at paulkirtley.co.uk/AskPaulKirtley66, AskPaulKirtley66. All the notes will be there, or if you're watching this as a video on YouTube, the links will be there as well. So wherever you can watch the video, the links will be underneath there. And I'll link to some of those relevant things there. But going on your own in winter is quite hard. You can get up there in summer as well, but the mosquitoes can be pretty bad, but the fishing can be good. Canoeing can be good in some of those places, and those are some options. If you want to hike as well, then there are some options for hiking. You can start doing some of the hiking trails in Sweden, for example, and that will get you into the forests as well as the hills. So look into things like the Kungsleden, for example, which is quite a varied trail, and there are other trails as well that you could walk that will take you through forests as well as through into the hills. So that might be an easier way into the environment in the summer, rather than trying to do a canoe trip or what have you, because most people can walk with a backpack on. And then of course you've got the whole North American continent to look at as well. Easier to organize a canoe trip in a lot of places. Canada is the home of the canoe, of course. You can do some great boreal forest canoe trips. Woodland Caribou, for example. Blood Vein is a trip that we do. That's all on the edge of the boreal, the southern end of the boreal. And you know, they're wonderful environments to go to. And they're not that difficult to get to once you decide where you want to go in terms of canoeing. Winter trips there are maybe a little bit harder, but there are still some ways of doing that. And probably the hardest part of the boreal forest for us as Western Europeans and maybe North Americans, probably the hardest place for us to get to are parts of the boreal forest in Russia, into Siberia, for example. That's going to be harder to get to, both in terms of logistics as well as paperwork. But lots of options. It's a big place. So I would say sort of choose your own adventure, decide what you want to do, what you're capable of, ask lots of questions. I mean, there's a ton of people who've done lots of different things in and around the boreal forest. Just ask questions. Get onto Google Earth, Google Maps, have a look, see where you fancy going, and then Google that place, Google public transport, Google adventure travel operators in those areas, get onto some adventure travel forums, ask some people about their experiences, ask me, ask other people who've done trips there, and you'll soon fill up a good picture of what you can do with your budget, with your capabilities, with your equipment, time of year you want to go. Hopefully that helps. I know it's not a closed off answer, but I don't really want to give a closed off answer, like to say you should go here at this time of year and do this thing, because there's so much potential. So hopefully that's given you some aspects of what you can do and how you might do them without maybe channeling you down something too narrowly. Loneliness on solo trips. This question is from Matthias, and he is from Argentina, and he says, "Hi Paul, I'm from Argentina and I like going to the mountains alone, but after a while I start to feel very lonely and it's quite depressing. My question is, how can you help me cope with this loneliness to extend the time of my bushcraft trips, or what you do in your travels to not feel that way? Any advice will help. I think you're the best. Peace." Oh, that's very kind. Thank you, Matthias. Well, I'm not a psychologist, Matthias, and I don't pretend to be one here on these shows or anywhere else. And it can feel lonely on trips. I think the isolation on trips can make you feel lonely. So I think you have to look deep inside and try to understand where that loneliness is coming from. Is it that you feel exposed on your own? Because that's different. Feeling exposed on your own in a wild place is different to missing other people for just company. That they're closely allied and they can feel similar, but the motivation, where that comes from, is different. And I've certainly felt I'm quite happy operating on my own. Very few of these Ask Paul Kirtleys, when I record them, do I ever have anybody else with me. Occasionally there might be somebody sat off camera that I've gone for a walk with. They might be reading a book, or they might have just wandered off for half an hour. But usually, I would say 95% of the time, I'm on my own. And I'm out for the day. And I'm very happy just wandering around on my own and being out. And I've done plenty of longer trips, clearly longer than a day, where I'm on my own, canoe trips, hiking trips particularly. And I'm fine. I'm fine with that. But even on days out, I've had intense feelings of being very much on my own, particularly in the mountains in winter. I've been in some situations in Scotland where I felt exposed and on my own and very small, and frankly thankful to get back home at the end of the day. Not because I was taking undue risks or being silly, it's just conditions get tough sometimes, terrain gets tough sometimes. Your body doesn't always perform as well as you envisage, you get tired, etc., etc. So there are times when you feel like you're out there, but then that's part of the reason we go as well. Part of the reason we go away from the comforts of home and the security of society is to stand up on our own 2 feet as human beings and feel what it likes to be out in nature as that individual, as that person or even group that is self-reliant, that is using their own skills and knowledge to negotiate that terrain, to be comfortable in that place, or whatever it is. That's one of the reasons we go. So the other thing I would look at is, what's your motivation for going? Why do you want to go? Is it you have a desire to see places? Is it that you have a desire to be on your own? Because maybe the answer is go with somebody else. If it's like you want to get into nature, you want to see wonderful vistas, you might want to share those experiences with other people. The answer might be find a partner, a friend, a colleague, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, that is going to be a companion to you on those trips. And then maybe that will complete the circle. That might be the answer. I don't know you personally, but for me, when I'm on my own and I miss people, I miss loved ones, I like just be grateful that you've got them in your life. I think that's one thing. In terms of having a lot of downtime, I think that can affect people. They're used to chatting to people in the evenings. They're used to maybe even just using the internet and television for company in the evenings, or even just listening to music in the evenings. I know a lot of people don't like sitting in the house on their own, or their flat on their own, or even in their bedroom on their own without some sort of company, whether that's television, internet chat room, watching a film, listening to music, listening to a podcast. All of those things provide some connection, some company, and a lot of people don't like sitting there in their home in the quiet on their own. So equally, they're not going to enjoy being out in the middle of nowhere in similar conditions. So take an iPod or your phone and some podcasts or some music, or a book to read, just the same as you would if you were on your own at home. That can be part of it, and that's something that I do. If I'm on my own, I'll take a book to read, and I won't always read it. I might get into my sleeping bag at the end of the day and think I'm going to read, and I'll read 2 pages and fall asleep, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Writing notes I find really good. I often write notes on my trips, whether that's in a paper notebook or increasingly, particularly if it's a shorter trip, as opposed to weeks and weeks and weeks, I might just use my phone. I've got an app on my phone where I can write notes, and then it's accessible on my laptop and my desktop when I get home, so I don't have to then transpose things or scan them or what have you to make sure they're saved in the cloud, or that they're in a rough form to start writing up a trip report or what have you. Writing notes is good. It helps you process your days. It helps you remember things. It helps solidify memories. It helps you focus on what's important. The other thing is you could journal about how you're feeling and try and get to the roots of why you're feeling a bit lonely. And equally, maybe you just don't need to be out for that long. Maybe it's your brain, your unconscious brain telling you that, okay, I've got what I've needed from this after a few days. I'm ready to go home, and I'm grateful for the things I've got at home. Like I say, I don't know your circumstances, but I would, in the first instance, have a think about why you're going, what it is that you're trying to get from your trips, not just practically, physical exercise or what have you, but mentally, psychologically, well-being wise, what are you trying to get from your trips? Think about whether or not you'd be better off sharing that with somebody directly by having somebody with you, and think about whether or not you're mistaking a feeling of isolation with a feeling of missing people, because yes, they're close together, but they're also different. That's as much as I can think of off the top of my head, Matthias. As I say, I'm not a psychologist. Personally, I'm happy on my own, but that isolation, that exposure can sometimes get to you. Being grateful for what you've got at those times is a big help, definitely. Thinking about the people you've got at home, your friends, your family, loved ones, your dog, or whatever, that you're grateful for having, those relationships you're grateful for, that helps, definitely. Alright, it's starting to rain rather than just drip. How to get people interested in bushcraft. Right, I can finish eating my Trek bar while this plays.
Hello, Mr. Kirtley. It's Adrian Spring with another question for the Ask Paul Kirtley podcast. My question for you today is this, Paul. I love nature. I like being in nature. We are nature. And I love bushcraft. It's part of who I am. Now, I've tried to spread the good word of bushcraft, the true essence of bushcraft, not kit, but I seem to have quite a stony reception. And I was wondering, how would you go about spreading or trying to get people interested in bushcraft? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because most of the people I speak to, it's quite stony ground, to be honest. Any help you can give me, I'd be very, very grateful for. Keep up the good work. You're a fantastic guy. You're a brilliant ambassador for British bushcraft, and long may you continue. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Adrian. Gave me time to finish my Trek bar and pour some more coffee. Well, the facetious answer, Adrian, is how would I get people interested in bushcraft? I'd dedicate 15 years of my career to it. I'd write a blog for 7 or 8 years, start a YouTube channel, start 2 podcasts, write for multiple magazines in the space as well as outside of the space, which is exactly what I've done. I think the question is, what would I do if I were you? I think it's sometimes easy to be too evangelical about certain things, and that can put people off. And I think you always need to tread a line between enthusiasm and being a bit too much of a evangelist in the bad sense of that word. There are some bad connotations to that. Clearly, people sticking their foot in your doorstep, in your door, standing on your doorstep, wanting to proselytize. That side of evangelical behavior is generally, from most people, not welcome. And I think if you're challenging people's ideas about a certain subject, you need to carefully tread between putting them on the defensive because they feel like they're being criticised, or they feel like the building blocks of their ethos, if you like, are being undermined, and giving them new insight. And I think you always need to try and be helpful rather than try and convert. I think if you're just trying to convert people to your religion, as it were, religion in inverted commas, then maybe you're going to end up with resistance. Whereas if you can say, hey, look, my approach, my understanding of these things here, yes, I've got this knife, yes, I've got this billy can, yes, I've got this tarp, but look how well I can use the knife. Look how well I can use a fire to do what I want to cook in this billy can. Look how well I can put this tarp up so that I'm always comfortable. And you don't even have to say that. It's how you do things. When you're around people who are good in the outdoors and you're not completely unaware of your surroundings, you can look at somebody and kind of go, that guy has got his stuff together. This person's all over the place. A lot of people talk a good game, and then you see them in the woods and you think, yeah, you've been on a lot of forums, but you haven't been out a lot. But when somebody's been out and they've got the basics down, they know what they're doing, you can see that. You can see that in camping in the woods, fly camping with a tarp and a fire and a roll mat or what have you, a blanket, through to, people winter camping, tents in the hills, how they set their canoes up, all of those things. You can tell when somebody's experienced, they got their stuff together. Just the way that they dress, the way that they hold themselves. So a lot of that's non-verbal, and that's one way you can influence people. And then they'll be like, you will find people being attracted to you because you're good. And then that makes them more open to what else you have to say. The other thing is just, if you want to show them aspects of nature, have all those basic kit things down. Have an understanding of how to sort your water, how to light a fire, all those things. But then be very, very good with your understanding of nature and being able to practically do that while you're out with them. Because again, if you can say to people, this is edible, this is, did you know you could use this? Here's some tracks of a whatever. Just engage them with the nature rather than telling them to be engaged with the nature. Draw them in, show them interesting stuff, give them some practical takeaways. All of that draws them into your way of thinking. They're like, yeah, I like what Adrian can do while he's out. I want some of that. That's the way to do it. Not by sitting in the pub after 4 pints, banging the table, trying to change their mind. I would say is probably the way that I would be doing it. Hopefully that helps. And if anybody's got any other comments, particularly experiences where they've introduced people to bushcraft, or they've introduced aspects of bushcraft to people who had a fixed idea about what it was in the first place and then able to expand, leave a comment below this on my blog, paulkirtley.co.uk/AskPaulKirtley66. That will take you straight to the page. Scroll down, comment section, leave a comment. Would love to hear from you, as I'm sure Adrian would. He's a regular viewer and listener to this show, and if you leave a comment for him, he will undoubtedly see it. Right, I'm getting wet a little bit now. Let's get on to the next question. What is the purpose of a bivvy bag? And this isn't as cynical a question as the title might give you the first impression of being. This is from Phil Schaefer, and he asks, I've never camped without a good weatherproof tent. So my question is, if the tarp keeps the rain and weather off you, what is the purpose of a bivvy bag? Thanks. Love your videos, Phil. So he's not even having a lot off about the do tarps keep you dry comments. He is genuinely asking, and that's a good question. It's like, what does a bivvy bag do? So it does help keep your sleeping bag dry, not necessarily from atmospheric moisture that's coming from up there. As you say, if you've got your tarp set up correctly, the water's going to run off. The water's going to run away from your tarp, not under your tarp. Don't sleep in a dip. We've talked about that before in previous videos. Water runs off, goes away. Some people will say, well, rain can come in the side if it's really windy. Yes, if you're right on the edge of the woods, on the windward side, and it's absolutely chucking it down, and you've got your tarp set high, some rain may come under the side of your tarp. In which case, a bivvy bag's going to be useful. If you're deep in the woods, where it's sheltered, and you don't need to move that far into the woods. I've had students on courses move 50 meters from where they were going to set their tarp up to where I suggested they should set their tarp up, and it's made a big difference in how sheltered they've been. And it's not about lots and lots of, hiding behind a big evergreen bush like a rhododendron or what have you here. It's about looking at the lay of the land, more trees to dull the effects of the wind, and then you get water dripping rather than coming sideways. And then of course you can lower your tarp a little bit if you need to, or have a slightly bigger tarp for the colder, wetter months of the year, just if you want some more room. But remember, the ground can be wet as well. Like I'm sat here, this ground is really wet. It's been raining, then we've had snow, then we've had rain on top of the snow's melting, it's dripping off the trees, the ground is sodden. So putting your sleeping bag inside a waterproof bivvy bag is going to stop it coming into contact with any moisture on the ground, which is important. There is atmospheric moisture, just in terms of humidity. It's going to protect your sleeping bag from humidity as well, to an extent, particularly if there's a heavy dew overnight, which in the spring and the fall there often is. You get warm daytime temperatures, but cold nighttime temperatures. You often get a heavy dew during the night and into the early morning. It will settle on the outside of your bivvy bag rather than on the outside of your sleeping bag. And then of course, if you want a bit more room underneath a smaller tarp, if you're traveling light, and you've got a smaller tarp, say like the smallest silicone nylon tarp that I've got, that little Integral Design Sil Tarp 1, which is about the same size as an Australian hoochie, maybe very slightly smaller, or about the same size as a British Army basher, but very light, very small. If you're under that sort of size tarp, if you're in a bivvy bag, you can stick your feet out the bottom. It's waterproof. Your feet, the feet end of your sleeping bag's not going to get wet, but you've got more room above you for kit. Just a bit more room to maneuver. So it just gives you a bit more room. So it is useful in terms of moisture in all of those circumstances. Then what else does it do? It stops your sleeping bag from getting dirty. Even if it's completely dry, it stops your sleeping bag from getting dirty. Dirty sleeping bags don't work very well. Sleeping bags keep you warm because of the loft, because of the air that's trapped in them. And the dirtier the goose down, or the dirtier the synthetic fill in your sleeping bag, the less it will loft, the more it will mat, and the less air will be trapped in it and the colder it will be. So it's imperative to keep your sleeping bag as clean as possible. Bivvy bag on the outside, and if it's not too impractical, which it sometimes is in really, really cold temperatures, have a sleeping bag, like a silk sleeping bag liner inside to stop grease and dirt from you going into the sleeping bag from the inside. So keep your sleeping bag clean, that's important. What else does it do? Two more things, and that's again to do with insulation. One is it stops the warm air that's trapped in your sleeping bag being blown away and being replaced by cold air. If there's even a bit of a draft, a bivvy bag is going to be more windproof than the sleeping bag. It's like wearing a Gore-Tex jacket over the top of a duvet jacket. You're going to get more wind protection from doing that. So it's not just a waterproof cover, it's also a windproof cover, which keeps that warm air inside the sleeping bag and not being displaced by a cold draft. Allied to that is it also traps air between the sleeping bag and the bivvy bag, which means that you've got another layer of insulation there potentially, and importantly, the cold air that's in contact with the outside of your sleeping system is not in contact with the outside of your sleeping bag, it's in contact with the outside of the bivvy bag. So you're once more removed from the atmospheric conditions. So it gives more warmth to your sleeping bag in that way as well. Finally, most bivvy bags have got some sort of hood, which means that you've got a place to put your, if it's not rolled up completely, just laid out on the deck, laid out on the ground, whatever you're using as a pillow can be laid on top of that, and it acts as a kind of ground sheet as well for what you've got. And if you pull it up a bit more, then that's going to be trapped inside, but it keeps it from the ground as well. So if you're using a fleece, for example, as a pillow, it's not on the ground, it's on the inside of the bivvy bag. So sleeping mat, bivvy bag, inside the bivvy bag, sleeping bag on top of the sleeping mat inside the bivvy bag, gives you a nice, warm, dry, clean environment for all of your sleeping gear, and that's why a bivvy bag is really good. Under a tarp. You can also use a bivvy bag in a tent. We won't get into winter camping stuff. Snow holing, whether it's quinsies, whether it's snow caves in the mountains, bivvy bag, super useful as well for protecting your sleeping bag for many of the reasons we've talked about. In a tent though, why would you use a bivvy bag? Well, again, it adds more warmth. And also, what if your tent gets completely soaking wet? Some people will put a ground sheet on the inside of their tent, and I know Cliff Jacobson is a big advocate of doing that. He advocates, rather than putting a ground sheet under your tent, put a ground sheet inside your tent as a kind of second bathtub layer, and that's probably a better way of doing it than putting the ground sheet outside where you're just going to be sitting on top of water. You've actually got some protection on the inside, and also some protection for the base of your tent from all of the things that you do inside your tent, moving around, moving gear around, etc., etc. So that's about water coming into the tent, and a bivvy bag would help in those circumstances as well. If the bathtub part of your tent got water into it for whatever reason. The other way your tent can get wet on a trip, for the types of trips that I do, canoe trips. If for whatever reason you get water in your portage pack and you get water into your tent and it's sopping wet, if you've got a bivvy bag that you can put your sleeping bag in, even if the inside of your tent is wet, your sleeping bag will stay dry. I always double bag my tents these days anyway, but even so, it's just an extra bit of protection. What can happen with tents as well if you're putting camp up and down every single day? I tend to use Hilleberg tents, and I tend to have them set so that the inner part of the tent is constantly attached to the outer part of the tent. It makes putting them up very quick. It also means you put them up in the rain and the inner doesn't get wet before you manage to put the outer over the top. But what can happen if there's a lot of condensation on the inside and you don't have time to air the tent off before you have to be on the move, you roll the tent away and you put it up again in the evening, and if you don't have the right conditions to dry the tent at that stage, you might end up with a bit of moisture inside your tent, maybe even within the sleeping area. And again, a really lightweight bivvy bag is useful for those circumstances. You can just slip your sleeping bag into it and you're not going to get any moisture into your bag, particularly if you're using a down bag. I like to carry a snug pack, Special Forces bivvy, weighs very little, packs down to nothing. You can check my Lightening the Load Part 1 video to see more on that, see how small it is and how light it is, but that's the one I like to take just so that I've got it with me. Even if I'm in a tent, it's just an extra little thing. And then if you decide you want to sleep out under the stars as well, with your sleeping mat and your sleeping bag, you can do it. You've got lots of options. So lots of reasons to have a bivvy bag, but the fundamental ones, under a tarp, first section of the answer. Right, I think we're on to the last question. Cooking sets for canoe trips. Oh, it's another audio question. Right, let's go. Ready?
Hey, Paul. I just wanted to ask you, what is your recommendation as far as canoeing trip pots or billy cans or canteen sets? I currently use a heavy cover titanium kit set, and it doesn't always meet every specification or trip that I guess I'm taking it out on or need. So just kind of curious, what do you use? What steel? Do you prefer aluminum, stainless, titanium? Do you prefer a pot or a billy can or a canteen set? I'm just curious. I have various different ones and different brands, but just curious what you recommend and what's kind of your go-to for just general water purification, boiling, collecting, etc. Thank you.
All right, so that's from Asmir. Good question, nice and clear there, thank you. Good diction there, I like it, good. Yeah, that's quite an open-ended question. I too also have lots of different options, and I've also used a lot of others from outfitters, for example. You get different things from different outfitters. It depends on how many people you've got with you, for starters, whether it's just you on a solo trip, whether it's you and a friend, whether it's 3 or 4 of you, whether it's 8 of you. You know, it varies what's going to work and what's efficient to take with you. You tend to be able to carry more elaborate kitchen sets the more of you there are, because you can cater for a lot of people from a certain number of pots in a way that you can't cater for yourself from a number of small pots, if you see what I mean. There's an economy of scale is what I'm trying to say with carrying a wider range. So it kind of depends on how many of you there are, and also how elaborate your meals. You know, are you just using boil in the bag, you know, backpacker's pantry, mountain house, you know, dehydrated type stuff, and you just need boiled water, or do you want to cook more elaborately? So that's part of the question, but I think your question is particularly about nested sets and canteens and whatnot. Some of the titanium sets are good. One of the things with titanium is it's light and it's tough, but it also it doesn't really hold the heat, and you get very direct heat transference in certain places, and it can be hard to cook steadily in them. I like them for backpacking. I use titanium cooking pots for backpacking when I can, particularly if I'm covering any sort of distance. You know, if I'm just going to do 4, 5, 6, 7 miles in the woods and camp, I'll just take a stainless steel billy or something. And again, if you're just keeping it to one stainless steel Zebra billy can, there is an economy there. And if you're using a fire, you know, and you're not carrying a stove, yeah, stainless steel billy is fine. You can boil your water, you can cook your food, etc., etc. If there's a few of you and you're backpacking, nested titanium set works quite well if you're working off a stove. If I'm doing a canoe trip, I tend to like to take stainless steel pots with a bail, and I tend to like to take stainless steel pots that are broader and a bit shallower, so more of the type that Coleman, Tatonka, Eagle Products make than, say, the Zebras that are taller and thinner, because yes, you can hang them over a fire with the bail. You can make a pot hanger, tripod, whatever you need, hang them over a fire. But also sometimes on a canoe trip, as I'm sure you know, Asmir, you can't have a fire. There's a fire ban, or it's not appropriate to have a fire where you're camped for whatever reason. Or maybe it's quicker to use a stove sometimes. Or you might just need to get a quick boil on. One of your friends is cold, you've just got into camp, they're shivering, get the stove on, get some water, get a hot chocolate into them, or whatever. Having a stove with you is something that we normally do. Even on a solo trip, I will take a small gas stove. I may not use it at all. So for example, the River Tay trip that Spoons and I did last year, we took a stove. And the only time we were really going to use it was the first night. And the pump broke, and we had to have a fire anyway. And then I bought a replacement on the way, and we didn't use it. We used fires the whole time. But I like to have something with me just in case. So I like to have pots that will work on top of a stove, but also work well on top of a fire. And for the type of cooking that I like to do on canoe trips, I find the slightly broader, slightly shallower pots very good, whether it's for mixing up a bannock mix, whether it's for boiling water, whether it's for cooking a stew, whatever it is, I find that I can manage to do that. So some sort of nested pot set. As I say, I think one of the fastest boiling ones that I found are the Eagle Products pots, because they've got a copper bottom and they just absorb the heat super fast, boil really quickly. I'll sometimes take a kettle, a small kettle. The smallest Kirtley kettle, for example, is 2.5 litres. That's good for a couple of people. You can boil water in that. You can set it by the side of the fire while you're doing other cooking, and you can manage to fit it in with some bigger pots as well. I'll sometimes also take a frying pan with a folding handle, normally one of the GSI frying pans, because they're relatively easy to get hold of. The non-stick pans, they're relatively easy to clean. But generally, I don't like non-stick pans, and I'm not a huge fan of hard anodized pots and pans. I've used them a fair amount. I get by okay with the Moores pot that I use in the woods, which is a hard anodized aluminium. My BCB hard anodized mug has lost a lot of its coating now after several years of use. And I find them harder to clean than just pure stainless steel. You can't damage stainless steel. You can't wreck it. You can scrape it with gravel. You can get sand in there. You can get ash from the fire in there to cause a bit of a sort of caustic washing mixture, which with fat almost makes a bit of a soapy mixture. You can get the things clean in the field without damaging them. Whereas I find non-stick surfaces, apart from frying pans, and hard anodized surfaces, just harder to maintain the cleanliness in the field without damaging the surface. And that also has an impact on hygiene. If you're not cleaning your pans properly, yeah, it's not good over the long term. You'll end up with some issues. So good quality stainless steel, broad, shallow, good quality bail, preferably one that locks so you can tip it without it going all floppy. And as I say, the ones that I've used that I find particularly good are Eagle Products, Coleman and Tatonka. So hopefully that helps, Asmir. And also, just to finish on that, that's kind of scalable. You know, you can take a couple of nested pots for a couple of you, and it'll probably do you, you know, the kit that I took on the Tay trip for me and spoons, for example, Eagle Products pot had a smaller Coleman pot inside it. We had a billy can rather than the kettle, mainly because we were just going to drink coffee. So we had a billy can for making coffee, a Morse pot for making coffee, and we had a frying pan, a folding frying pan. So we had like a kettle, if you like, or a coffee pot, 2 nested pots, and a frying pan. But you could also cater for 4 people with that same set. You wouldn't need to scale it up at all for 4 people. Once you get beyond that, you'd have to start extending it. But then you could also start, you know, if there's 8 of you, you can start thinking about, do I take an aluminium Dutch oven? And then we can do roasts, we can do, we can bake bread, we can make lasagna, we can make cottage pie, we can do all manner of different things that you can do with a Dutch oven that you can't do. Bake a cake. Miss and Ivy trip last year, we baked, it was their birthday on the last night, we baked them a cake. You can do that with a Dutch oven, and there were 9 of us on that trip, so we had the sort of nested pots, we had a kettle, but we also had an aluminium Dutch oven which served a lot of purposes and gave us a wider range of foodstuffs over that trip, which was nearly 2 weeks long, than we could have if we just had a basic cook set. So that's something else to think about as well. But basic nested set, stainless steel, you won't go far wrong with that. Right, that was everything. So got my phone in my pocket. Good. Starting to get dark now, although it won't seem it on the screen because I've got the auto level thing set on, so it adds a bit of boost. It will get more grainy, of course, as it always does, but you can hear me just as well, and that's what's important. It is drizzling now. The snow's melting as I see it. It's going. It's wet. It's damp. It's a bit cold. I've been quite comfortable here, though. I've got a merino base layer on. I've got a fleece. I've got a nice wool loop stitch merino hat, double layer, and I've got this Norröna Recon jacket. Fjallraven trousers, which are a little bit damp now because they haven't been re-waxed for a while. What else have I got on? I've got my lower boots with Gore-Tex lining, the old ones. They're coming to the end of their life now. They're starting to leak a little bit. Some nice thick icebreaker socks, and I'm cozy. I'm comfortable here. Hot drink, bit of food, all good. It's only 2 degrees Celsius today. So yeah, it's been a good session. Hopefully that's useful to many of you. Thank you for the questions. Please do subscribe. Please do share this with your friends. As I've said before, the best way that you can help me with these shows and with everything that I do, going back to what Adrian said as well, how do we spread the word? Well, we spread the word. If you can share these shows, if you can share other material, that if you find a particular blog post on my blog that you think is really useful to you, there will be other people in your network that also think it's useful. So if you could share it down with your friends on Facebook, a group that you're a member of, your followers on Twitter, whatever it is, that's most appreciated. That's how you can help me with the material that you like me producing. That's the best thing. You know, I'm not interested in Patreon or PayPal deposits or what have you. I have a business and it works and I earn a living from it, and that's good. Frontier Bushcraft is my training company, and if you're interested, it's there at frontierbushcraft.com, and that's how I earn my living. Obviously a little bit of advertising on the YouTube videos, but largely if you want to help, if you want to give back a little bit, just share the stuff. That's all I ask. Thank you very much, and keep the questions coming. And of course, between now and the next Ask Paul Kirtley, enjoy the outdoors, but stay safe. Take care. Cheers.